Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Project Pro's podcast on AI monetization, where we chat with AI industry leaders on how AI is being used to realize real business outcomes out there in the real world inside companies. We have with us today Beth. We are honored to have Beth. She has 20 years of experience across data science and IT. Beth is the CEO of Bast AI. Bast AI is a full stack, trustworthy, and explainable AI solution that empowers businesses to build custom AI for its team members that is both trustworthy, free of biases, and explainable. Such an apt topic for the times we're living through today. Before this, Beth spent over 9 years at IBM, where she was a distinguished engineer, again, focused on trustworthy AI and cognitive science. As part of her role at IBM, she was also the chief data officer of IBM's $20 billion managed services business that was later spun out as Kyndryl. Beth, thank you so much for taking time to do this. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
But I would really like to start by understanding, you studied archaeology and anthropology. How did the inspiration come to transform from that into data science and analytics and as an AI leader? How did that happen, that journey?
It's more of a pedestrian road than most people think. But I've always loved studying history and languages, and so was an archaeologist, and really, started my life as that. And I was very young, and I needed to pay off my student loans because I was not independently wealthy like Indiana Jones. And I very much wanted to, kind of go into industry, and I took a right turn. So instead of getting my PhD, I stopped with my master's, and then I went, and because I was a programmer, because I won the lottery with my parents, who taught me, early computing and early programming. It was just part of what we did, in the house. It was just another language that people understood, and, jumpers and electrical sockets and the hardware and how all of that happens. I was on a plane probably, and I did .com consulting. So they would hand me a book and say, you are debugging Java tomorrow, you are debugging C++ over here. And it was a great time because you didn't have to have a lot to get a job. You just needed to know, enough about computing to be like, yeah, I've written a website. I know what, hypertext transfer language is, I can do this, right? So it was a different time, and there was a lot less jargon. And so if you knew the language of programming and computing, you could really, start anywhere. And then I actually started with IBM. I had a 23-year career there. And I started with IBM as a contractor, and then I rolled into a regular when I was pregnant with my son, and we were in 2004. And so I spent a very long time doing all of the things that I did at IBM, and really looking at information systems, information theory. And to answer your question directly about archaeology, I noticed that everybody had a different definition of data. And so we started the data science profession in 2012, when the Harvard Business Review said that the data scientist would be the sexiest job of the 21st century. We all wanted to have the sexy job. And I was doing information architecture. So really, how relational databases, and not only SQL databases and all of these things that are coming up in graph models. We were doing that, and then we were going, hey, wait a second, we need to flow data over these algorithms so it has a feedback mechanism, needs to learn, right? And so this is really the start of data. And I reached back into my archaeological roots, because when you're an archaeologist, you would pull something from the ground and you would say, okay, I'm going to do my best to relate this to all of the culture. What were people wearing? What were they doing? What were they saying? All of the things that you possibly could. But at the end of the day, Binny, it was up to your imagination to say why it was where it was. And so much of what I have learned over time, especially with data, is that data is an artifact of human experience. So some human being created that system. They created the code that created the log file that outed the piece of data that went into the database. They created, the data itself. What if early botanists, miscounted a tree ring? There's so much fallibility and there's so much bias and there's so much in some ways. I want people to know how easy it is to make human mistakes that then become codified into what we know as true today. And so that really sent me into this really kind of connection. And I think I said this to you before, a career is definitely something you can look back on. It's hard to do when you're in it. Because I was just having fun with my friends. We were solving problems. We were, working for clients. We were doing all of the things that you do when you're young and learning. And I think that that's a really important thing. I did not grow up and say, I want to be an archaeologist and then go into data science and earn more money than the MBAs I went to school with. But I really think that those are the things that you have to do as a human being, is you have to see what you are curious about and follow your curiosity.
Oh, that's so brilliantly said. And there were two specific phrases that you very matter-of-factly said, but I think are very profound. One was your point about a career is something that you look back on and not really when you're in it. That is so true. And the way you put it is just, fantastic. The other one was pretty profound, I thought, where you said data is an artifact of the human experience. Could we unpack that a little bit? Because I think there's so much in those 5-6 words there. Like, how did you arrive at that definition? I haven't heard a better definition of data.
I've been thinking a lot about data for many, many years. And when I went out and I asked my friends who are data engineers or data architects or data scientists, there's so many data people, right? And chief data officers and, the chief AI officers. And there's so many different variations and nobody had a specific definition. And because nobody had a specific definition, I work with some of the best designers on earth. And they really help me design the ideas and help me speak about things and create things that can go very far. And I always say, I put everything out there. What's mine is yours. And I share it because I want people to take it and remix it and make it relevant for them. Because that's what we do with data. Data, literally comes from the word datum in Latin, which means something that is given. And so I'm always asking, what are we receiving in return? And especially in this day and age where the business models are, my opinion is the business models are about to drastically change because data is now able to be formed into things that we can see as a mirror, and we can start seeing what we can't see when we are just looking at an individual in a data set or an individual in a statistical data set. We can see now the larger picture. And, big data started some of this. And now with AI, it's just amplified. And what people, I think, don't realize is that the data carries the signals of who we are. And I'm gonna give a story to kind of give you an example of this. Sure. We had the designers and data scientists working together on a project on the Titanic data set. So any data scientist that starts, people usually start with the Titanic data set. You can go out to Kaggle, download it, and it talks about who died, who didn't die, who got on a lifeboat, who didn't get on a lifeboat. And so the question that I posed was, and the hypothesis that I wanted them to test is, what is the feature of getting on the lifeboat or not? And they came back with what I think we know, but we didn't understand in relation to bias and social bias. and cognitive biases is the people who were going to get on the lifeboat were probably, a man in first class over a woman and child in steerage. And because class was such a social norm in that day and age, that was codified into the data. And so now we can see that social norm that today we would be like, wait a second, that's not right. But that's how it was in that day. And that was totally normalized. That's part of what a norm is. And so I see data as the stories that tell us how we are. There's 188 cognitive biases and counting. There's all of the. There's a cognitive bias codex that is beautiful. It's like this big, beautiful circle. And it talks all about how human beings and our brains and how our brains function and work, with our biology. This is like hardware is that we are so biased, and it's so difficult to see that bias because it's part of the atmosphere. It's part of our ethos or our ethics. And the Greeks used the word ethics to really describe the genius of a people, which is the genius is the culture and the atmosphere that people create to know what those social rules are. And so when I study and try to give people an understanding of ethical AI, it's to say, hey, let's use the data to understand what are the atmospheres or what are the social norms that we want to amplify and spread forth. And so the work that I do is all about, really starting to understand how can I make AI that comes from really good grounded source data to show people that it comes from this source and to show attribution, which is what I value as a human being. And then guess what? They trust it. They want to build a relationship with it. And I don't want to go too far, but I think it's just such an opportunity for people to think about the fact that all data is biased. All humans are biased. If we just invert the understanding of using data and AI to understand more about ourselves and what we value, and then choose to be able to say, I want to put this forth because this is what I value and this is what I want my children and my children's children to value. That becomes something more like a tool that everyone can use. And it starts with what are humans good at? And that's empathy and curiosity and creativity. And what are machines good at? Probabilities and statistics and linear algebra. And it's if you think like that, then you're like, wait a second, I can use a machine to do the linear algebra to say how high the building needs to go, or how many steps the ladder needs to make for people, to use it. And this is where I think it's just such a great opportunity to have a partnership with AI and to use data as an understanding of what is that relationship that I want with AI and how do I develop that as a partnership.
That's brilliant. I mean, you kind of very well just humanize data. So, and was that the inspiration to kind of focus on Bast AI? And maybe could you help us understand kind of what does the Bast AI product actually do?
So when I was back in IBM, I the last 2 years I ran some P&Ls and some offerings, and I really needed to understand go-to-market activity and sales and delivery enablement and understand what that's like in order to be able to learn how to be a CEO. And I knew I was at the end of my tenure, and I say very kindly that I graduated because I learned so much. I had no idea how much I learned as a global exec, and learned about business and relationships and that healthy transaction of somebody wanting to pay for something that you're doing. I think that's a very healthy business transaction. And When I opened Bast, I started in August or October of 2022, and we had been playing around with generative AI and some of the back end all the way back to Copilot and programming because of my roots. And, it's interesting because I didn't like the fact that the programming, it's very vanilla. So people who have been programming for many, many years and understand object-oriented programming and encapsulation and inheritance and polymorphism, like all of these things, it was just like, it wasn't explaining why it was doing what it was doing. And it bothered me a lot because I was like, this is not consistent. And the black box, you can put a black box on top of another black box and extract the feature. But I'm like, that uses so much compute, and what a waste. Really, totally. Why not sanitize the input before you put it into the neural net to help the scientist guess the pattern or guess the feature? And transformer architecture is just magical at, transforming and understanding syntactical relationships to really better translation. And it was created to better the understanding of translation. And so we wanted to show the world that there's this other side. So there's like probabilistic and deep learning and neural nets and things that have a lot of opacity because they literally have hidden layers, and the output of a data scientist program is put into something called a confusion matrix. So there's so much like uncertainty in that, unless you have, I call them priests or priestess, like unless you have the language and the jargon and the experience to know the rituals to push the data into the neural net and, kind of crank through. Yeah. The other side is my world in social science and linguistics and unconstrained squishy humans. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to give people an understanding of the semantic and symbolic AI that comes from ontologies that uses logic and reasoning based on concept hierarchies and inference, from deductive and abductive reasoning. So, I mean, there's so much more on this side that people didn't know. Yeah. And even growing up in IBM, there was this bias towards machine learning, and you must put your model into production. And I'm like, but data scientists don't know how to build an information warehouse or a multi-dimensional data warehouse. Those are two different things. They don't have software engineering to know how to create a microservices architecture. Anyway, I could go on, but Bast is a combination. And what we do is we provide a full stack. And we're in the process of really helping to embed this in very specific clients' front ends so that we can gain 200,000 users instantly. And we can do the harder work of understanding what is the user experience for explainable AI. And that is not something we know now at all. And a lot of this, generative AI, where here's a chatbot, you're going to get to 85% with RAG, with the retrieval augmented generation. And in my world, RAG is to a database that a hash table is to a vector store. There's so much more that you could do in vector stores that RAG just, it's a brand new term that like those of us who have studied vector space for a long time are going, okay, do you know how much more you could do if you're doing graph RAG? Or if you're doing, lots of, I would love to get into technology because that's where I live, but bringing it up a level, the generative AI generates probabilistic outcomes that are probably correct some of the time. And so what we do with Bast is we make GenAI safe because we show you how to sanitize your inputs to have deterministic outputs or probabilistic outputs based on what you need. Okay. And we started doing this in the medical field, showing people that I am intrepid about showing the right next step on a protocol with surfacing the page or a visual representation of the page of that protocol so that I could get people to trust it and use it. Because without adoption, you don't get any business value whatsoever.
Yeah, makes sense. And when you say the focus is to sanitize the data going into the models, Beth, could you maybe just help us understand that a little more with an example when you say sanitize? Yeah.
So we are like the Perplexity, but for business. So we show all of our work of taking like a pararescue medical handbook or a nursing acute protocol or whatever it is, like whatever unstructured data it is. And or in skills world, like all of the open source data that's out there for skills, all of the unstructured data, and we put it through a pipeline and we show all of our work from transforming it from raw to staging to transformed. There's stemming, normalization, lemmatization. There's, all kinds of text analytics that we know work very, very well. And so then we put it into a version system of record. And then we give you an ontology or a map that maps that system of record for you that carries the lineage of where it comes from. So when you retrieve what you want, you're like, here's a picture of the page of the 8th edition, because that's what the latest version. That's right. And it sounds very simple. And I wish, I wish more people would think in these terms, because it all starts back with, I value attribution. I value sources. I value the ability for people to have the understanding of where the data comes from. And most importantly, to have that consistent test, retest reliability. And when you're dealing with a probabilistic outcome that is making a decision that is life or death, you need to make sure that even if you are using probabilities, you need to know what that 20% looks like. So when it fails, what does it look like? And this is something that you can't do with the transformer architecture at all, because they didn't sanitize the inputs. They don't know all of the things that they put in. In know as in, knowledge or information or relevant data. Like they have an understanding of it, but they do not know, because they cannot show lineage and provenance for that. So using that, to me, the right way to use GenAI is to use it to generate variations or generate the transformations. Do you remember back in the day when we were like 20 years ago, we were putting in Q&A pairs for chatbots, like question and answer pairs, right?
Right, yeah.
So we we would literally go around and be like, Sue, I need 100 variations of this question. Joe, I need 100 variations of this answer. And we would like human create the variations. Yeah. But we were IT. We had no idea what the business was going to ask. And some business guy would come and ask our chatbot one thing, and we'd be like, I didn't have that. Yeah. You didn't have that? Like,
no. I mean, you're saying, if the one thing that the business user asked was not in one of your scenarios, then the chatbot,
precisely, because we couldn't think like the business user. We didn't have the language. So now with GenAI, it solved our problem completely, because we can generate the variations, store them in our system of record that's fully versioned. And, the work that we're doing is super cool because it's really small. It can fit on a device. And so it can operate without internet connectivity. It can operate using, solar power. So think about like disaster response toolkits. My parents are in Florida. I want them to have my technology so that they understand the roads, and they can, get a blueprint, or they can get translation, or they can get first aid, information that is critical. Yeah. So why not use GenAI to create really great narrow AI that you can ship to people? And so we're doing this, and I really want to talk about like the thesis that I have, and the thesis for Bast is to enable the people who are closest to the problem. And we have a huge amount of problems coming through with climate change and all of the challenges that the next generation will have. And I desperately want the people who are using their hands right now to have access to the type of AI that Bast builds, because it's fully referenceable and because it's good information that they need. So construction workers, plumbers, people who are working in retail, people who are teaching, people who are medics and nurses, people who are taking care of us, people who are working with their hands. Those are the people that I want to have all of this. You know, I'm surrounded by books all the time because I love books. And I'm like, we're surrounded by all this knowledge. Why can't we get it to the people who need it in a way that, you know, maybe surfaces a diagram on how to put a tourniquet on? And this is where, you know, that's what I want, is I want Bast to show the world that there's a practical alternative. This is practical AI. It's like GPS. When GPS first started, you had to look up or you would just run into something, right? Now it's so much better that we don't even have maps. We just use GPS. So how do we make AI something that can have that referential integrity, can have that precision, can have that auditability, can have all of the things that we value, and be able to provide the people the right information at the right time.
Okay, that's fascinating. So, Beth, you know, with your passion for humanizing AI, if I might call it that, you know, humanizing AI, and kind of, like you said, empowering the person closest to the job, right? And earlier, before we started the podcast, you were talking about how back in the day when people were using SPSS, you would start from the business problem outward. Could you maybe help us understand a little more about that framework and what can we learn from there and bring to our current world?
So part of the creation of the data science profession and certification, we chose to use a methodology that was created with SPSS, and it starts with the business problem. And, you know, I'm going to be really reductive for a second, but there's 3 steps to a mathematical problem. You start in the real world, you have a problem, you ask a question, you have a hypothesis, then you go into the mathematical world, and then you and then you actually are performing a calculation or creating a mathematical model, or, you know, doing something in the mathematical world. And then you go back into the real world to see if you've answered the question. And what we found is data scientists suck at 1 and 3. Everyone wanted to jump into that mathematical world without actually understanding the problem. And this is not new. Like, understanding problems are hard. A lot of people would say we only have the hard problems left. But I think that it's super important. And to just frame this, it was me, a statistician, and a mathematician. And I really felt that the social scientists were not being represented at all, because we knew something about data that data scientists don't understand. We can make it say anything we want. We can tell any story around it we want. You know, it's not the victors who tell the history. It's the archaeologists of the victors' descendants who tell the history. So I think that's where, you know, from a social science standpoint, I badly want people to have, you know, curiosity and creativity and emotional intelligence enough to work with a diverse team. Because the data scientist that is one and done and says, here's my model, it's 99% accurate, put it into production, they have no idea what happens when data flows over it. Because guess what? Data doesn't stay in that static data table or that static Excel file. Data changes and it's a flow. It's not an event. So what the data scientist has done is they've just created a model for that event. You have to create a model that learns and grows and has feedback. And for that, you need to understand, what are the problems that people are having? Is it a problem that they have tried to solve? Is it a problem that they have tried to solve in the last week? Is it a problem that somebody would pay you to solve? And so all of those things are like, I am not creating artificial general intelligence. I am creating a system so that everybody can access this explainable AI so that they can make it a practical, narrow intelligence to augment their intelligence. Yeah. And, you start with 3 principles. All AI augments people. All data and systems are explainable and transparent, because that's why you need to get the adoption. And then all data and insights, they belong to their creator. And Binny, this third one, this is what's going to change everyone, is when people really start to think about the fact that social media and many, many AI systems are created to harvest data from human beings, and harvest is the correct word, in order to be able to then sell to brokers that then create predictions on that event, not on that data, not on that human, on that event that human once bought some diapers for their nieces that live down the street. They don't need, beer to go with that diaper. There's so many things that people are not thinking about when they're thinking about the data that is harvested. And I think we need a different way to think about models that are intrinsically purposeful for making sure that the human being knows that they can talk to an AI. And when we first started, we had some people on our team that would, interact with our cats or our conversational AI technology. And Bast is named after the Egyptian cat goddess. So we build cats or conversational AI technology. They would interface with some of the cats, and we would be like, I think you guys need some privacy. Like, we don't need to log all this information. And we did. We created a way where none of that information would be logged, and the person could have a conversation with an AI in much the same way the early ELIZA models were back in the day, that were created in the 60s and the 70s by psychologists who were like, wow, people need to talk to other people. Shocker. And so but it changes. And Binny, can you imagine conversing with technology that won't go anywhere, that will be deleted? Like, wouldn't that change your perspective?
Yeah, it sounds like a sad thing to do. Right? Yeah.
Well, sad in the sense that, we know that we are being watched. We know that we are being, given things, and because it's black box and because it's predictable, humans are trying to figure out the pattern of, like, why did I get that ad? What piece of data, gave that ad to me? Or, what is it that created this scenario? And that's what I want people to think about, is that they're not supposed to know. It's black box. It's not random at all. Yeah. It's definitely a probability. And it feels like half-done science to me, because they're not talking about, like, why it errored, why it hallucinated. Right. And if we can get there, and we can give people the understanding of, here's why it hallucinated at this time, or here's the source that was used, it changes the experience of the human being. Is like the human being feels seen and respected, and not trying to find a pattern for things that don't exist.
I'm particularly fascinated by the term hallucinated, right? Which is, people found a way to take a bug in the system and give a really cool name to it, hallucinate. It almost sounds like something I might want to do once in a while, hallucinate a while sometimes. So that was
it's anthropomorphic. Like, so human beings, part of our biology, in order to create a shared reality, is to personify and anthropomorphize. We'll do it with flowers. We'll do it with the sun. Look at kids. They do it all the time. It's part of who we are. And, we, a friend of mine took llama, and she showed that llama, chose it, and there were choices that were made in order for llama to seem more personable. And because Llama is open source, we can see this. So instead of like I am, which was like the next 98%, statistical prediction, there was a weight put in to use contractions. So it goes against what was predicted in order to seem more personable. So the thing that I'm always trying to teach people is that there's humans making choices. And so how do we get humans that are, how do we get a really wide number of people making those choices? And my number is 1.6 million. It's a 20% representation of the 8 billion people. 1.6 billion, pardon.
I'm sorry, what is the 1.6 billion number, Beth?
That's a 20% or a statistical representation of the 8 billion humans on Earth. And so if we want a representation of people who are actually interacting with the data that is fed into some of these models in their language, in their dialogue, in their locality, we need 1.6 billion people.
That's a very large sample size. Yes. Yeah.
Well, 20% is not all that large. I mean, it's two-tailed distribution for like a 98%.
No, just going back to the 3 pillars that you're talking about, the first one about AI augmenting humans. And you've spent a career where you have hired and trained and scaled up thousands of data scientists, right? And when it comes to humans, what is the problem with the current way we upskill them that you think AI is going to transform?
So I had the tenure that I had as the chief data officer, I really, we had a huge crisis because we had a Spectre meltdown, we had GDPR, we had, all of these things happening all at once. And we needed to upskill and reskill 25% of the 150,000 humans in 175 countries. Oh, and so we needed to do it quickly. And
were they developers?
What I found was that in HR is a cost center, much like IT. And so they don't have, in fact, every HR professional that met me, first thing they said, they would be like, Beth, I'm not technical. And I'm like, okay. But the problem is the HR systems would tag people with like a job role skill set. And that's like a customer service rep, customer service. What we found is when we looked at that person's profile, and what my team did very quickly is we looked at all of the various data sources that we got access to. And some of them were like 40,000 tables on a mainframe that had, or 40,000 databases on a mainframe that had, hundreds of thousands of tables and all kinds of different things. And what we found is if we correlated what the person was learning, what kind of things that they were taking, to what their profile was and what their job role skill set was, we found customer service reps who were screaming that they wanted to be a data scientist, or they wanted to be a Red Hat engineer, or they wanted to be a, name it. Because they were taking Python, or they were taking like these things that we were like, wow, these human, or they had master's degrees in information systems, or PhDs in log file analysis, or quantum. So we just found that human beings in 100,000 dimensions, by correlating all of this information, if we gave it back to them, we started to show things like, here is evidence that you have incredible communication skills. Would you like to go into marketing? Here's some evidence that you have great collaboration and teamwork. And I'm specifically talking about these soft skills that are, durable skills, the only skills that you need to kind of get to be able to move forward in life, I think. And what we did is we sort of inverted the model and said, instead of predicting what people would do, we're gonna use the system to show the people that they have evidence to become a data scientist, or they have evidence to become something else. And we upskilled and reskilled 23,000 humans in 16 months. And we did it pushing them through certified programs that required proctors, exams, etc. And it was this explainable AI, because we were using NLP and ontologies back in the day. And what we found is the skills that are needed in order to see the pattern of the people who were successful, because you can document the past to predict the future. So we saw all these, it's 60 years of professional development history. So, the DEs and the people who really came up, they had curiosity, they had creativity, emotional intelligence, empathy, communication, collaboration, teamwork, digital literacy, which is an interesting one, technological proficiency. We started, looking at efficacy and training, fidelity. So we started looking at all of these things in a different lens. Instead of saying, this is the person's skill, we said, this is the evidence for this skill. And it motivates the human being to go, oh, I'm a mom with 4 kids under 10. Of course I have critical thinking and conflict resolution. Right? It makes people understand the jargon, Binny. And that's all it is. And so by the way, the number one skill to be successful, number one, hands down, the only skill you need is to be likable.
Wow.
We are social animals. That's it.
Right.
That I mean, I have lots of data behind that, but the concepts always come back to this social human interaction.
Likable.
And I think that the companies who have the most necessity, like Walmart, like Sam's Club, companies that hire and fire huge numbers of people, the cost of attrition is over 250%. To upskill and reskill somebody doesn't cost you a dime other than motivating that employee. Right. And so the companies and I recently heard from the Sam's Club CEO, and it was in this Chief AI Forum, which was fantastic in New York during UN Week. And he said he was so proud, and he was talking to all of us who were data officers or chief AI officers. And he's like, I'm not technical at all. I just want you to know that I'm really interested in using AI. And I have all of my people being upskilled and reskilled. We've automated 400,000 tasks and added 400 people.
Wow. And,
the people who were automating the people out of their business or reducing headcount for margin expansion. And, that's going to be pretty vestigial, because you're human beings that can actually, and you can start to measure man plus machine or human plus machine, not human or machine. It makes so much sense. It's that's how you get to the next, that's how you really change the way that you view your resources and your talent and your human resources. Back in the day, there was Toyota used to call automation for the human element. I think it's Jidoku. And the thing that I remembered from that is that the best software is a human brain. So if you can automate all of the things and then let the human change and make the decision and do the critical thinking and the communication and all of that, you have an amazing, amazing company.
I just want to stay for a minute on the likability being the most important life skill you brought about. If you had to unpack it, what do you think are the components of likability?
I think it always comes back to understanding who you are. And what you can contribute and what you can provide and I'm a huge fan of servant leadership, in that, leaders are doing what they're saying. Yeah. That starts with, you as a human being, do what you say, because trust is making something you value vulnerable to another human's actions. So if people can trust you, and you have maybe a liberal arts degree and a wide range of topics that you enjoy talking to other people about, and understand yourself I think that makes you likable. The ability to work in a well-performing team, I so see this happening just everywhere. We're going from individual contributors to well-performing teams because of agentic AI. Human beings are learning to team with agents, AI that is automating the things that they don't want to do, like fill out forms or, process large amounts of data or, come to a probabilistic conclusion. The thing that human beings are shifting towards, and this is my anthropologist talking, is coming back to more, poetry and symbols and things and art and music, and human made is going to become something that is very special, because human beings have the most beautiful gift of all. We can be random. Computers cannot. That's why they have lottery balls, like that they still jiggle the lottery balls, or they measure the gas in order to be able to get randomness. Human beings, we are, we have that beauty of random, of uncertainty, of being unconstrained. And so I think that being likable is knowing what you're good at, knowing your talents, and understanding how you can contribute to the whole.
Very nice. Very well said. Beth, you also you're kind of author of a book called AI for the Rest of Us. Could you tell us more about what's inside the book?
My co-author and I, and she is running the Trustworthy AI for IBM Consulting, and her name is Phaedra Buenaderas, and dear friend. She and I really wanted to put down for posterity that there's this alternative, that you don't have to just listen to the 5 or 6 companies or the 5 or 6 people about, where AI is and what it's going to do, and, sort of that doom and gloom. We want people to know that it's something for everyone. We want everybody to be a part of it. And it is something that it is like, to me, it's the next GPS. Everyone should have it. Everyone should be able to use it. I don't want people to be afraid of it. And, I offer on every appearance and podcast I do, reach out to me. I will answer any question. I work with a lot of people in very high level positions, and the questions that they ask me are all really about, how does it actually work? And is it magic? And it is not. It is just sufficiently advanced technology. And you're not supposed to know why. You're not supposed to create a pattern. It's black box for a reason. And I want people to know that it's something that we can all access if we choose to.
Beth, this has been fantastic, mostly inspirational for me to kind of hear your passion and your life story, and how you're kind of using that grounding on human nature and history into AI helping all of us. Thank you so much for taking time to do this. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate you very much. Thank you for having me.